Of course, the world ended while I was in the middle of nowhere with only a blunt sword for defense. Specifically, a hunk of metal that resembled a sword enough to look good in a movie, but would decidedly not be able to fulfill the same task as an actual, well, weapon. And while I wasn't alone, my twin sister Mia wasn't exactly in any better shape than I was. So, in summation, our only real advantage was that there were two of us. And maybe, just maybe, these swords might be a bit better than just sticks at whacking monsters. They were blunt training swords that were meant for Hema, though unfortunately the two of us weren't practitioners. At least I wasn't. I knew enough to make choreography look good, and while Mia was taking it much more seriously than I was, she'd only been at this for as long as I had. In actuality, we just liked to come up with somewhat complex choreographed fights, then hike out into the wilderness and act them out. I'd design it, we'd test it to make sure it was doable, and eventually we'd come back with some of my fellow film students to have the affair redone professionally. Or as professionally as we could afford. For practice, to have stuff to put on YouTube to grow my channel, and, well, it was fun. Escape reality for a while. Pretend that we were back in the days of monsters and heroes. Even though in reality, the Middle Ages were mostly just the time with a whole lot of cockroaches and rats in places where they really shouldn't be. And no monsters. Unless you counted exotic animals that were described as monsters by panicked explorers. But judging by the looks of that floating screen, we were about to come face to face with some creatures truly deserving of the title. Something howled in the distance. Uh-oh. I grabbed my sword, noticing that Mia already had hers out. She'd likely been like that since the message had arrived, but she was in a weird stance, not one that I was overly familiar with. "You need to stop them," she hissed at me, eyes fixed on something I hadn't seen yet. I tried to follow her gaze, but all I could see was foliage. But I was right there with her on the stabbing thing. Getting whacked with a blade like what we had would hurt. Obviously, several kilos of steel tended to do that, but they were too blunt to do real damage. But the point was still somewhat dangerous. Stabbing was where most of the accidents happened. There was only so much you could do to blunt the tip before it started to be obvious in the videos. So we trained with big, fat, stupid-looking rubber covers, and only took them off once everyone had their parts down pat. But right now, there was nothing left to do but hope that these literal toys of ours held up to whatever was lurking between the trees. The thing or things out there made another noise, but it wasn't a howl, it was a growl, and it was far too fucking close. I whirled around, then twisted back into my original position, turning back and forth, trying to spot the source of the sound. "There!" Mia hissed, pointing at the creature that had gotten far too close for comfort. But there was something even more disturbing floating above it. Quicksilver Wolf, Evolved Wolf, Level 3. So we definitely weren't just dealing with a weird hallucination then. There was more to this nonsense. More I sure as shit couldn't think about right now. Instead, I hefted my sword and pointed it at my enemy, ready to defend myself for when this inevitably hit the fan. I really didn't like the look of this thing. Sure, it was pretty. A beautiful silver predator that looked like something straight out of a fantasy novel. Maybe as the main character's pet/totem animal/companion. A gorgeous animal, but one that I'd much prefer to observe from the other side of a fence. It growled once more, its head low to the ground, teeth exposed. I hurriedly glanced left and right to check if there were any others sneaking up on me, which might or might not be the case. I didn't get a chance to find out, as the wolf took that as its chance to go for my throat. My sword flashed through the air and smacked across its snout with a dull thump,